You can go back in. If every one of these people who were saying, we are ruling the Spanish colony in the name of Fernando, with the mask of Fernando, they would all have these little handheld masks that would just look like this chum right here. Isn't that sweet? Is that a pretty scary Halloween costume? Okay, so who are these people who are like saying, we are in charge of this Spanish-speaking colony? Think of who the candidates are. You ready? Think back to who all the different people were living in the Spanish-speaking colonies. Okay, here are some contenders. Slaves. Nope, they have no power. Sorry, slaves. How about indigenous people? The Indians. Nope, okay, they're not going to be in a position. How about people who have mixed Indian and European heritage? Mestizos. Remember mestizos? Okay, make sure you write down mestizo, because I want you to make sure just you have that fresh in your memory. Mestizo is somebody of what heritage? Mixed Native American and European, or Spanish, yeah. Okay? How about, we got two contenders here. You ready? I'm going to put them both out there, and you're going to see which of these two are going to be the main people wearing the mask of Fernando. Are you ready? The two groups, Creoles and Peninsulares. Ooh, hold on. Let's just make sure we remember who they are. Raise your hand if you can identify the details of who are the Creoles or who are the Peninsulares. Go. Creoles, put this down. Creoles are like second, third, fourth, fifth, sometimes even sixth generation of Spanish people who had arrived earlier on. Got that? And who are Peninsulares? People born in Spain. Okay? So they were like the first generation. And typically Peninsulares would be like working for the Spanish government. They would come over for a while and be like, I speak perfect Spanish, and I work for the king, and I've got the latest fashions. And the Creoles, raise your hand, this is very important. Well, what do the Creoles have besides like having their families live there for a long time? They had money from what? They had land. And was that land valuable? Heck yeah. They had, well, we call them in English-speaking areas, we call them plantations. What is the Spanish word for plantation? Plantación? No, close. It sounds good. What was it? Haciendas. Very good. Haciendas. Write that down. Haciendas. Hacienda. It's a Spanish plantation. Hacienda. I think I actually got that in there. Don't I put that in my list of terms and so forth again? I thought I did. It was in the last one, and I think I'll spell this. So I'm going to go ahead and spell it off the top of my head so you can write this down. Hacienda. Hacienda. It's a plantation. Okay? So, who had these big plantations and wealth accrued from many generations of living on this land? Creoles. Got that? So here's the answer. Who are the people who are going to rule the colonies in the name of their king? Creoles. Write that down. Very good. Creoles. And here's another word for you. What do you call when you have a room full of Creoles and they're like, let's all work together to rule together in the name of the king, in the mask of Ferdinand? You call them a junta. How do you spell junta? It's a committee of Creoles. How do you spell junta? Junta. Write that down. It's not a junta. That's how an Anglo would pronounce it. It's a junta. Okay? I'm going to introduce you another word too, as long as we're introducing words here. All right? So what do you call a bunch of Creoles that form together into a military committee to rule the colony on behalf of the king? A junta. What do you call each of those military dressed up Creoles? It's kind of like, what do you call George Washington when he's on his farm? A plantation owner, yeah. What do you call him when he dresses up in his military uniform and fights off the British? He's a general. Yeah, I mean, he's a general. He's a fighter. We've got a word for you, and I know I've got it in here. In fact, I'm going to tell you which bullet point it is. Okay, because I don't have it. Oh, here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I've got it 10 down there. Actually, there it is. Hacienda owning Creoles with a military background. Do you see it? What is it? It looks like Caudillo, but it's not Caudillo. Do you see it there? It's not Caudillo, it's Caudillo. I think I've got a slide for it. I'm going to scooch down here. Oh, here we go. Caudillo. Let's go ahead and introduce this word. I know I've got further on the thing, but we'll come back to it. It helps to understand this. A man who owns a plantation, hacienda, is called a Creole. Actually, he's part of the Creole group and so forth. His wife is a Creole, his kids are Creoles, his grandpapa was a Creole, and so forth. If you give him a horse and a gun and a sword and a uniform and put him in charge, he's a Caudillo. Now, put this down as well, because this is going to be a big difference between a lot of these revolutions that take place in the Spanish-speaking areas versus what we have in the United States of America. This is a big difference. I'm going to go ahead and introduce it to you right ahead of time. And it actually has to do with this. Are you ready? Before the American Revolution, who really was in charge of the colonies? I mean, Britain, they were British colonies, but who was in charge pretty much day to day of running the colonies? The colonists were. Would it be fair to say that in those British colonies, all the places you guys came from, you had a form of democracy? Yes, write that down. Okay? And that's why you guys were so upset. You're like, hey, we got a democracy here. If we're going to pay taxes, we're going to be the ones voting for the people who charge us taxes. Hello, that's democracy. You got to understand that? That was going on in the British areas. You had all these different rights that were part of a democracy. Now, you ready? Contrast. Did they have the same thing in the Spanish-speaking colonies? The King of Spain, was he like a constitutional monarch where a lot of power was shared with lots of nobles and other people? No. In fact, go back to Ferdinand VII. He was an absolute monarch, like Louis XVI was an absolute monarch in France. He was an absolute monarch. So who really was in charge in the Spanish colonies? The king was in charge. And who did he send over on a regular basis to make sure that the king's will was being carried out in the colonies? Peninsulares, you annoying, perfect Spanish-speaking government, kingly bureaucrat. You got that? So, here's the deal. When Creoles took up swords, became Caudillos, military fighters, are they going to turn out like George Washington and go, hey, we beat the Spanish, let's have a democracy? No, write this down. A lot of Caudillos who fight are going to be more like Napoleon. They're going to hang on to power. You're going to see in a lot of these Latin American countries, dictatorships pop up. Do you know what a dictatorship is? Did you guys read Animal Farm? Who were the leaders of the Animal Farm Rebellion? Hi. Who? Creole. Yep. Yes. Mm-hmm. Who were? What was that name? Yes. Who were the leaders in the Animal Farm Rebellion? Napoleon and Snowball and who was the other one? And yeah, so like the pigs were in charge. And then who held on to power? The pigs. All right. So not to be too rude or crude about it and so forth. Who is going to be leading these rebellions ultimately in the Americas? Not the pigs, but Creole leaders. And when you put a Creole in a uniform and give him a gun, what are you going to call that man? And don't say like a Caudillo, like I want a tortilla with mozzarella. Actually, mozzarella is pronounced correctly. So, Caudillo. Okay, there you go. So, yeah, again, not really interested in democracy. Don't be surprised that when we have lots of new independent Latin American countries, that they're not going to end up turning out just like the United States. There's going to be some challenges there. Okay? All right, you ready? Let's go and see what happened here. All right, now. Did Ferdinand VII ever come back to power? He did. Write this down. What event led Ferdinand, former King of Spain, to become King of Spain again? Yeah, and actually the first time. Yeah, but let's combine them together just for the sake of brevity. Okay? Ferdinand, write this down. Ferdinand will come back to power in 1814. Okay? Ferdinand will become king again in 1814. Of course, meanwhile, you're going to be having lots of Creoles coming to power in the Americas. Okay, so we got that. So literally for about 6 years or so forth there, who's going to be running the show in the Americas and the colonies, in the Spanish-speaking colonies? Creoles. And what do you get when you put a whole bunch of Creoles together into a unit? Everyone said together, started with a J but didn't have a J-sounding name. Junta. Very good. Junta. Very good. And what do you call one Creole? You stick him on a horse with a gun and a uniform? A Caudillo. Very good. All right, now. Good. All right. Let's look at this. Ferdinand VII is going to come back into power in 1814. So this is going to be like after Napoleon is kind of defeated, and then he's defeated again. And anyway, so 1814, he comes back into power. Meanwhile, look at the slide. Meanwhile, some of the people in Spain have been getting together with some interesting ideas about how government really should be if and when we ever get a king back. I want you to write this down. It happened in 1812, so 2 years before Ferdinand comes back into power. This is kind of anticipating. Some people are like, I think Napoleon, he's going to be like attacking Russia. Nah, that's not going to work. Don't tell him it's not going to work, because we want him to attack Russia because that's not going to work. And then we'll be rid of Napoleon. And then who's going to be in charge of Spain again? The Spanish. The king of Spain is going to be in charge of Spain. But anticipating that the king is going to be in charge of Spain again, we've got some ideas for him. Write this down. In 1812, some leading people in Spain got together in one of the cities called Cádiz. Okay? And they came up with what they refer to as the Cádiz Constitution. Now, is a constitution a very important word? Hello, it's the biggest basis of our government in this country. I mean, they weren't even in charge of their country, and they're like, we've got a constitution. Yeah. This is the way the Spanish government's going to work. Okay, they've got some of the things on the slide up there. Some of you guys are writing it down. That's not all incorrect. I'm going to be adding some additional things as well. So if what I say meets what's there, great. If I say something additional, make sure you write this down as well. Okay, you ready? First, there will be a king. Okay, fine, yes. So there's a role for the king. The king gets to be king, says the people gathering on their own at Cádiz to talk about the new constitution. There's going to be a king. But notice, this is important. It's going to be a constitutional monarchy, as in the king will be limited in his power. Okay? Blake, what country at that time had a constitutional monarchy where the king was not absolute in his power? Very good, Britain. So what these guys are envisioning is going to be more like a British-style government. Good. Okay? But notice this. There's going to be elections, and they're going to make it, here's the word, even more liberal than Britain has. Who had the real power? Remember this. Raise your hand if you can tell me. Who had the real power in Britain? If not the king, who was kind of like the most powerful groups? Parliament. And who was in the Parliament? Nobles and some of the wealthy people in Britain, like some of the merchants, people who had been doing very well in lots of trading. William Wilberforce was from that merchant class. He wasn't a noble, but he made a lot of money as a merchant, and so therefore, hey, I want to be in Parliament. Write this down, though. In the Cádiz Constitution, they have a more liberal idea about doing this democracy thing. You ready? It's called universal male suffrage. Let me explain. You got the male part, right? So guess who doesn't get to participate in this? Females, okay? Wow. They're sexist even back then. Yeah, they were sexist back then, okay? Suffrage. What is suffrage? Voting. Very good. Voting rights. So if men get to vote, what do you suppose the universal part has to do with? All adult men. Write that down. As opposed to in Britain at the time, could all adult men vote? No. You had to actually have some wealth, some property, if you wanted to be eligible to vote. And even in the early United States, they had that. But eventually we'll get rid of it, and even you could be a poor white man and vote eventually in the United States of America. So here's an idea. We're going to let all the poor white guys and the rich white guys and all the white guys and so forth here in Spain get to vote. Okay, got that? A limited king. Freedom of the press. Write that down. Ooh, freedom of the press. Ooh, that's freedom. So if you have freedom of the press, do you suppose that means they can criticize the government and the king? Yeah. Okay. Free market. So capitalism, free market ideas. Okay. Here's another one. And I want you to understand this. This is going to be really, really important. Because you're going to hear these two words, and you're like, wow, that doesn't really seem to excite many emotions and so forth, but it's very, very important. You ready? Land reform. Write that down. The Cádiz Constitution was in favor of land reform. Now, does that mean like remaking like the fields so that you can plant crops in them? No. Take a guess. Volunteer. I'm going to see if anyone else has got their hand up besides you, Eric, on this. What is land reform? What is land reform? I'll tell you what. I'll give you a clue. People who own land, like the big landowners, they don't like land reform. Kind of, yeah. It's redistributing the land so that if you're poor and you don't have any land, guess what? You're going to get land. You understand that? That's a very big idea. So who doesn't like land reform? People who own a lot of land. And who pretty much owns all the land in Spain? The big landowners. You got that? So, land reform is an idea that the poor people like. Okay? Oh, here's some other things that are not in there. Let me see if they have that on here. Yeah, they don't have it on here. You guys are going to need to write this down. In this Cádiz Constitution, there is no mention of one really, really important institution in Spanish society. I mean, it was so important that these guys literally had a monopoly during the time of Christopher Columbus, when Ferdinand and Isabel were like, Christopher Columbus, you guys, go off here. And meanwhile, back in their country, total monopoly. What are we talking about? Nope, not talking about bourgeois. Are going to be like, those are going to be like business owning, factory owning thing. Not the bourgeois. Something else. I'll give you a clue. You ready? Do you remember during the Protestant Reformation, which way did Spain go? Protestant or Catholic? 100% Catholic. Says who? The government. The government and the Catholic Church were like this. Right? Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition, as in the government, working closely with the Catholic Church, goes in and roots out all heretics. Under the government and the Catholic Church, who was in charge of some really important things like education? The Catholic Church was in charge of education. The Catholic Church was very, very powerful within the whole system. Okay? I mean, even before, Christopher Columbus and so forth, when there were Jews and Muslims living and so forth in Spain, they all got kicked out. This was a completely Catholic country. So write this down. You ready? The Cádiz Constitution? No mention of the official role of the Catholic Church. In fact, some of those folks were getting the idea that maybe we should sort of have a little bit of between religious official role and the government. In fact, some of you guys know this. In America, by that time, what was the official church of the United States of America? Was there an official church of the United States of America? No, there was not an official church of the United States of America. Most people would identify themselves as Christians. There were some smaller groups of other folks. But there were so many different brands of Christianity. You had Anglican, you had Catholic, you had Quakers, you had all kinds of different ones. They didn't make one official church. So there is a lot of religious freedom. You can put this down. What they're anticipating here is a lot of religious freedom. Okay? Downgrading a little bit the official role of the Catholic Church. Yes, Eric?
Oh, I was raising the finger like we have won the First Amendment
Yeah, First Amendment. Yeah, you're going to learn officially about that in the United States. But I mean, here's the deal. It's like in a public school, what is the official like prayer that is used to start the school day? Is that a prayer? Not exactly. I mean, there's the reference to God there and so forth, but there is not. Do you guys have freedom of religion? Which one? Exactly. Anyone you want. What is the official one that the government is going to sponsor and support? None. So you guys have a lot of rights when it comes to your religious beliefs and so forth. In Spain at that time, who was in the best position with respect to their religious beliefs? Easy. Protestants? No, the Catholic Church. That was the official church. But the Cadiz Constitution talks about doing it, about like not necessarily having the Catholic Church in there. You ready? All right. So they came up with that in 1812. Who comes back on the throne in 1814? Ferdinand. What does Ferdinand think of this Cadiz Constitution? He hates it. Write that down. Very good, very good. He hates it. He wants to be an absolute monarch. Okay? He has the support of, you figure this one out? Let me see. Do the big landowners like him? Yes, they love him. Who else likes him? The Catholic Church likes him. Okay? So he comes back in 1814, looks at the Cadiz Constitution and says, I wouldn't even say that's a nice job, guys. You guys suck. I'm not going to do it this way. You guys suck. He gets rid of the Cadiz Constitution and he rules like an absolute monarch. Is that going to work out for him? Guess what happens? Within 6 years, he's kicked off the throne again. Write it down. 1820, he's kicked off the throne. Way to go, Ferdinand. You got kicked off the throne. You got bounced. He's gone. He's kicked off the throne. And what kind of government are they putting in oh, by the way, just as a side note, check this out. Because the war was going on before he finally lost it. And he was trying to come up with some money to fight the war. You know when European leaders are trying to come up with some money to fight some big war, Napoleon sold us the Louisiana Purchase? Write this down. 1819. Put my hand up if you can tell me. Spain got $5 million in 1819 from the United States. We bought some land from them. We actually kind of forced them to. We're like, we would like that land. And we could take it because you suck and you seem to be having a lot of problems back in Spain, even holding on to your throne. But we're going to do you a favor and give you $5 million, and we're going to go ahead and then take this land from you. You think you know?
Yeah.
What's your guess?
I believe it is Florida.
What's your guess? Okay. Anybody there have other contenders? But that's just a bunch of swampland that's going to be future, theme park worthy.
Yeah.
Write it down. It's Florida. Write it down. We bought Florida from Spain for $5 million back in those dollars. Those dollars, that was a pretty fair amount. Back in those days, $5 million was worth a lot of money. You could make $5 million
Our capital
from Spain. Yep, from Spain.
Washington, D.C. was also like a...
Yeah, I know. It was, yeah, swamps are cool. Yeah. No. What I'm saying, some people are like, what the? We bought Alaska, even cheap, or for really cheap per acre, from Russia. And we're like, yeah, we got polar bears and snow and ice and dirt and then eventually gold and oil. That worked out pretty well for us. All right, so here we go. So even with that $5 million going to the king, write this down, the king lost control. 1820, he's overthrown. So think of this. So it's kind of like Spain is a hot mess during all this crazy times and so forth. Okay? By the way, guess who put him back on the throne? In 1823. And this country, along with the other big countries in Europe, Prussia, Austria, Britain, and Russia, these ones are like, we want to only have monarchs on the throne. We only want to have or maybe monarchies that are working closely with the nobility. None of this liberal democracy crazy stuff that they're trying to do in Spain or in the United States of America. We don't want that. So guess who sent an army down there and put him back on the throne? France. So who took him off the throne in the first place? France. Who put him ultimately back on the throne in the final stages? France in 1823. But guess what, pal? By 1823, you know what you really don't have that much control of anymore? Because meanwhile, across the Atlantic, you know what's been taking place? Latin American independence movements. Okay, do you understand that? Spain is a hot mess. You got all these different fights going on this way, that way, and so forth. And meanwhile, over in the Americas, you've got a bunch of Creoles and some others stepping forward and going, we're just going to go ahead and take it from here. Are you ready? The Latin American Wars of Independence. Okay? Here we go. Oh boy, howdy. Latin American. Take a look. Everything that's dark green or light green is going to be at various different times Spanish. Although somehow Napoleon got hold of this particular territory, sold it to us at the Louisiana Purchase. The purple is Brazil. Okay? The purple is Brazil. During all of this crazy times going on in Spain where the king is in or the king is out and this is going on and so forth, these Creole leaders are going to be looking around going, you know what? I think we ought to just sort of take matters into our own hands. The British have got our back. The British are going to help this. Write this down. The British are going to help Spanish territories become independent. And it's really easy to figure this out. When Spain was in control of Spanish colonies, who could officially trade with those Spanish colonies? Spain. Who wanted to trade with Spanish colonies? Britain. If those colonies become independent countries, who can trade with them as much as they want? Everyone, in particular, Britain. Write this down. When those Latin American countries become independent, guess who's going to be the #1 trading partner with them in the world, ultimately? Britain, Britain, Britain. Okay? And Britain are going to be buying up all kinds of things. Don't put anything away just yet. We're still going on here. Okay? Britain is going to be trading all kinds of things with those guys there. Now, for the most part, write this down. Who is going to lead the independence movements? The Creoles. But at times, just like we saw in the United States fight, you're going to have the lower classes. And this is where it's kind of annoying sometimes. Would you put it past a leading Creole, a Caudillo on a horse, to say to the poor people, let us all fight together, and I make promises that things are going to work out very well for you? Write that down. Some of the Caudillos will promise things to the poor in exchange for, I don't know, what can the poor offer in a war of independence? Yeah, to fight their lives. Will they get everything they want after the war is over? Not necessarily, okay? It's like, if I'm a Caudillo and I own a bunch of land and I end up being all powerful, am I just going to institute land reform and like hand over the land to all the poor people? Not necessarily. But it does work out pretty well to have those poor people with guns pointing in the opposite direction at the Spanish forces trying to retain control. Now, here are the different areas, and I want you to write these down because we're going to see these playing out. Up in the northern part, you have the Viceroyalty of New Spain. Okay, I want you to know geographically because this is going to be on the test. Basically, if you look at sort of like Central America to the north, it's called the Viceroyalty of New Spain. Most of that ultimately will be known as Mexico. Okay? You have another area called the Viceroyalty of New Granada. That's going to be the northern area of South America and then part of Central America. You got that? And then you have the Viceroyalty of New Castile, and we'll go through the Viceroyalty of La Plata, and when we're all said and done, next time we will see all of those Spanish territories are going to become independent countries. Boom, boom, boom. And we'll see all the fights going on here. We're going to those ones, and then we'll be done. Okay? Pretty good shape. Make sure you wipe down your desk. After you wipe down your desk, you may go.